Sure. Now we have it. The ICC have issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. So I guess the first question is, why?
Yeah, it's an enormously emotive one, this, isn't it? It's caused the British government a whole load of an issue. The details, it probably we get too much depth. In principle, what the International Criminal Court believe is there's significant evidence that they believe warrants a potential prosecution around the atrocities and the behaviour of Israeli Defence Forces in the Gaza Strip. And we could go into the details of it because it's quite a lengthy bit of statement, but I don't think that's particularly helpful. The principle, I think, is the British government was then asked the question, well, if Netanyahu travels to the UK, surely you're going to have to lock him up. You know, you're a signatory to the International Criminal Court. And there's a fascinating couple of interviews. I think we've got one for us now that just shows how the British government tries to wheel its way around answering the question, will you lock up Netanyahu if he comes to the UK?
International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, amongst others. The UK is a signatory of the International Criminal Court. So I just wanted to ask if you can confirm that he would be arrested if he came to the UK.
Well, that's not a matter for me as Home Secretary. In the International Criminal Court is, of course, independent, and we respect its independence and the role that it has to play. But in the overwhelming majority of International Criminal Court investigations, they never become a matter for either the British legal and law enforcement processes or for the British government. In any case where they ever do, there are proper processes that need to be followed.
Well, I think Prime Minister Keir Starmer has also been put in a very uncomfortable position. Well, I think first he was asked, do you agree with it? And then, you know, I'm not sure whether he was asked whether we should lock him up, but I know Home Secretary Vet Cooper was asked that question. Yeah, she was sort of dancing on a pin.
Yeah, I mean, it raises an interesting philosophical question. If you sign up, we as a country, nation signed up to the International Criminal Court, and therefore we should abide by its judgments. America does not sign up to the ICC, neither does Israel, and therefore they have a polar opposite view to this than we do. Now, from a government perspective, the government supports Israel like America supports Israel. But now we find ourselves where we're meant to conform to an ICC judgment and lock up Netanyahu if he comes to visit. But are we? Are we going to do that? Because that would put us in a direct line of conflict with America and potentially look to as if it's eroding our support for Israel. It's a fascinating conundrum. But I think also what's been, and I'm never a believer in coincidences, as you well know, this week, we've also heard that there is the potential that there might be a ceasefire between the Israeli forces and Hezbollah up to the north in the Lebanon. And you go, okay, are these two events linked at all? Is it that Netanyahu thinks the whole ICC judgment is an outrage, but he probably will recognize that it is an indication of growing international concern about the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza, and also how long is the operation in the Lebanon going to go on? Because it's not a war that Israel can win in the north. They've been down this path before. It's easy to fuel the fight from outside the borders because Israel doesn't control the borders of the Lebanon, and therefore it's not a fight they can win. And it's becoming increasingly difficult, bloody, high casualties for the Israelis as they move further and further into Lebanon.
Yeah. I mean, it will turn into another Gaza if they're not careful. Although obviously Lebanon's a different sort of government, as separate from Hezbollah than maybe Hamas has been. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it would be very difficult. And if you've been through that once, you know, maybe irrespective of what you think the international sentiment is, who wants to go through it again? I mean, I think the question I would ask. I listened to an interview with Sir Richard Dearborn earlier, the ex-chief of MI6. His position on this was very clear. I don't know. I'm not saying I agree with it or disagree with it, but it's nonetheless interesting to see. His position was very, very clear that Israel are fighting a war of survival, and in war, I'm afraid lots of bad things happen. The question is it deliberate? And his position was the only thing that's deliberate is that Hamas have not protected its own people. Now, during the Second World War, we opened up the entire underground system to our residents in London to keep them safe. The tunnels in Gaza are bigger than London Underground. So why didn't Hamas open up the tunnels for its residents? Well, there's maybe two answers for that. One of them is they clearly wanted to create fatalities at a scale for their own propaganda. No, these are the words of Dearborn. So, sorry, Dearlove. So, my concern is that there'll be a lot of people who don't agree with this, and what they'll be doing, they'll be pointing to politics within the ICC. It won't be the first time. So I think this is a delicate time for everybody, and I'm not sure it's straightforward.
And I completely agree with you. I don't, the sentiments around it. And I was doing an interview early on today, and I was given a bit of a hard time around this issue, as if it's either black or white. The British government should either be a signatory and therefore lock up Netanyahu, or they walk away. And you go, okay, I get it. In a binary world, when I was younger, everything is black and white, right and wrong. As you get older, you realize there's a lot more nuance in some of this stuff. And actually, if you're forcing the government to take one view or the other, that's probably not where they want to be. What they want to be is focused on how you bring the war in Gaza and in the region to an end. And is the best way to do that to pursue an ICC judgment against Netanyahu, or is it trying to create the conversations that bring that war to an end rather than fanning the flames of them? And I don't know, but I suspect this is where it's been incredibly uncomfortable for the British government. But I'd say on the positive side, it does appear as if the Hezbollah seem happy to move north of the Litani River, which, if you remember from UN 1701, from the earlier conflict, that's where they should have been.
It's like no man's land, yeah.
And it was that the Israelis move out of southern Lebanon. And if actually that effectively returns to the pre-war agreement, that should allow Israel to return to their lands in the north of Israel, and hopefully would bring the conflict in the north, at least, to an end. And I do think Hezbollah has been given a bit of a schwacking over the time, and of course Lebanon suffered as well. So if they at least stop now, it does feel as if Lebanon might just be had enough with Hezbollah, because they'll have blamed Hezbollah, and at least the fighting will stop. So it's just possible that that part of the conflict could get tied up, but we still don't seem to be any closer to ceasefire down in Gaza. And part of that, unfortunately, is still linked to the 100-odd hostages that are still being held by Hamas.
Yeah.